What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to another conference championship preview and prediction where today we get a rematch of a game that we saw in Austin, Texas earlier this year. And man, I could not be more excited for the SEC championship. We got the Texas Longhorns in their first season in the SEC, are in the SEC title game, and they will be looking to avenge their only loss from their 2024 campaign earlier this season, while the Georgia Bulldogs have more often than not been the king of the SEC. They have been the top dogs in this conference. They are back in this position again, but they're the underdog in this one. Well, they're going to look to be the top dog yet again in the conference that they have owned for the better part of this decade. And we'll tell you everything you need to know about the Bulldogs and Longhorns here in just a little bit. But before we do that, you guys know I got to say thank you for all the love and support this channel has received, continues to receive. It does mean a lot to me. And please show your support any way you can by interacting with the channel any way you can. The best thing you can do is hit the subscribe button and ring the bell, especially if you are as big of a college football nerd as I am. You don't want to miss an upload at all. Thank you so much for simply just kicking back, relaxing, and watching this video. If that's all you want to do, hey, that's perfectly fine. I appreciate it anyway, but you can also like, comment, share, and if you'd like to support me outside of YouTube, go give me a follow on any social medias, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, at TailgateNate29. Hopefully, come 2025, going to start posting a little bit more about what I do outside of YouTube as a sports media student. But enough about me and enough about all of that. You guys know how you could support the channel, and I really do appreciate it. Let us talk about Georgia. Let us talk about Texas. This is going to be a fun one from Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. So for those of you that are new to the channel, how do we do preview predictions around here? Well, I'm glad you asked. We're going to take a deep dive and look at some keys to the game when each team possesses the football. So we are first going to look at this Georgia offense against this Texas defense, and then we will flip the script. We'll take a look at the Texas offense against the dog defense, and at the end of the video, we'll go through some more keys to the game, give you some final thoughts, how I think this game is going to play out, and at the end of the video, of course, a final score and a prediction for who comes away the SEC champion and who gets a first-round bye in the college football playoff. The loser of this game will likely host a college football playoff game regardless, but we'll save that discussion for a video that comes out on Friday. Before we dive on into some keys to the game in the SEC championship, let's take you back on what happened there. I believe it was October 19th. Yes, it was in Austin, Texas, where Georgia and Texas played each other. It was a 30-15 win against the Georgia, or I'd say it was a 30-15 win for the Georgia Bulldogs against this Texas team. Very low scoring affair, very defensive affair. No one got over 300 yards. It was a turnover cluster. 4 turnovers for Texas, 3 turnovers for Georgia. It was just a sloppy game all the way around, but defense and the rushing attack of Georgia led them to win this game. Okay, so what has changed since then? Well, we'll talk about it, and we'll talk about some more of the nuances that happened with that game as this video goes on. But let's start with the Georgia Bulldogs. Carson Beck is the quarterback here, and the highly touted quarterback has had some turnover problems lately, but you take a look at what he has done in his previous couple of games. He has been really good. 4 passing touchdowns with no picks against UMass, 2 passing touchdowns with no picks against Tennessee, and 5 touchdowns with no picks in the 8? Yes, 8 overtime thriller against Georgia Tech. It was wild. It was crazy. It was such a fun game, and Carson Beck played really, really well. So ever since that stretch of games in the middle of the season where he was throwing pick after pick after pick, he has calmed down and he has really honed that in, and it's a Georgia offense that is led through Carson Beck and this passing attack. Now, the rushing attack has shown promise, but Nate Frazier and Trevor Etienne just have kind of failed to get it going on a consistent basis this year. It's not the Georgia rushing attack that we are used to seeing. However, it does have some really darn good wide receivers. Arian Smith, Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, Lucky the tight end, London Humphreys has started to have a little bit of a bigger part within this offense as well. But when you step back and you take a look, there's no one tried and true guy that is a dominant deep ball threat. However, a lot of these wide receivers for Georgia have had their moments. Arian Smith has had a 55-yarder. Dylan Bell has had himself a 67-yarder. And I believe both those wide receivers have had multiple 40, if not 50 or 60-yard plays in the case of Dylan Bell. And it is a wide receiver by committee room. So a lot more of those guys are going to be involved in this Georgia offense, but it all does run through Carson Beck. Now, when you're going up against this Texas defense, we have seen what happens when Texas and their defense takes over. Now, some people might have been saying before that Texas A&M game, they haven't really played anybody. They haven't shut down anyone substantial. They allowed 30 points to Georgia. But, I mean, you go take a look at that box score, 280 yards. That is all that Georgia was able to get. Texas defense forced Carson Beck into 3 picks. The Texas defense was okay on third down. It was 6 of 17. But overall, really, since then, this is the Texas defense that has only allowed 14 total touchdowns all year. I don't know how people can say this defense is not good. It doesn't matter what caliber of opponent you're going up against. Allowing only 14 touchdowns all year is an absurd, absolutely ridiculously crazy number. In Texas, we saw what happens when defense takes over in that season finale against Texas A&M. They allowed the Aggies to only 248 total yards, so that's under the 250 mark. Only 3 yards per rush, only 6.3 yards per pass. They forced 2 Aggie turnovers in that game. The Aggies are only 4 of 11 there on third down, and this Texas defense just absolutely took over. You take a look at what Texas was able to do with their pressure: 3 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. You even go back to what Texas was able to do in that game against Georgia. Not as great, 1 sack, 4 tackles for loss, but their defense did affect that game, and it kept Texas in it, if not for all of the turnovers offensively. Well, the Texas defense definitely could have won them that game against the Georgia Bulldogs. So here are some keys to the game, right? And especially when you go back and you look at that previous matchup, well, Carson Beck has got to be smart with the football. This Texas defense blitzed him. No, it didn't provide a ton of pressure, at least on the stat sheet. It didn't. 1 sack, 4 tackles for loss. It forced Carson Beck to throw balls that he wasn't comfortable throwing, and Carson Beck just made some mental errors. He's been playing a lot better since then. If we see the Carson Beck that doesn't turn the football over, Georgia can move the football really, really well. If we get the version of Carson Beck that's going to turn the football over up and down the field, yeah, this is going to be a long game for the Bulldog faithful. And again, I just talked about it. We've seen what happens when the Horns defense takes over. They allow nothing on the ground. They especially allow nothing through the air. They force turnovers. They generate pressure. They are great on third down. This is one of the more well-rounded, if not the most well-rounded and most complete defense in all of college football this season. That is how good this Texas defense is. And if you pressure Georgia, it starts to unravel, and Georgia starts to break down and unravel. If Texas can provide more pressure, statistically, more tackles for loss, more sacks than they were able to do against Georgia in that previous game, and even still do some of the things they did really well in that game, like pressuring Georgia to throw the passes, pressuring Carson Beck to throw balls that he's not comfortable throwing. Anthony Hill, Michael Taffy, David Benda, and all of these phenomenal defensive linemen, all of this phenomenal secondary members. Andrew Makuba is another phenomenal defensive player. Force mistakes, force them early, force them often, generate pressure. It's a Georgia offensive front that's been kind of suspect. Carson Beck has been kind of suspect, especially with turning the football over. If this Texas defense takes over and they take this game by the horns, literally and figuratively, going to be a long day for this Georgia offense. But there is another side of the football that we have to talk about, and it's when Texas is on offense, because that is why Georgia was able to come away a winner in Austin on October 19th. Texas had no offense whatsoever. Quinn Ewers, 211 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. Solid enough stat line, but you take a look at his completion percentage, 25 of 43. That's not going to get it done. They had to throw Arch Manning in there, and he couldn't even get the job done in his limited time. 4.7 yards per pass was all Texas was able to muster. The run game at the time, they had been beaten and battered, and this Texas backfield was littered with injuries, and the run game was non-existent. 27 carries for 29 yards. That's only 1.1 yards per carry in the previous game between these two teams. Ever since then, this Texas run game has really stepped up, and who especially has stepped up is the sophomore and Quintravion Wisner. 157 carries, 812 yards, and 3 touchdowns this season. He has really come along and has given this Texas offense some life in that run game. You take a look at what he did in some of his more previous games. Give me a minute pulling up stat sheets right now. You take a look at the game against Texas A&M. He went off. 33 carries, 186 yards, 5.6 yards per carry. You take a look at the game against Kentucky, 26 carries, 158 yards, and 1 touchdown in that game as well. You want to keep going back further? Sure, why not? Quintravion Wisner, 17 carries, 59 yards, and then Jaden Blue was there as well, 14 carries for 83 yards in that game against the Arkansas Razorbacks. Now, Jaden Blue can still play. He's still going to be a viable option, but Quintravion Wisner is hot. This is not the Georgia run defense that we are used to seeing. It is not as aggressive as we are used to seeing it. It allows big plays a whole ton. Now, it didn't allow it last time to Texas, hardly at all, but this is a Texas run game that has reinvigorated life. So I'm talking about that middle point first. But this Texas run game versus the Georgia run defense. If Texas has a run game, it's an element that Georgia didn't see in their previous meeting because Texas just had no run game to speak of at that time. If Quintravion Wisner continues to be hot, continues to run like one of the best running backs that we have in the country at the level that he is playing at right now, then that's going to cause a lot of problems for this Georgia defense. But Quinn Ewers also did not look his best in that game against Georgia back on October 19th. Can Ewers find a better rhythm the second time around? He was just off. He was missing throws, and the Texas turnover problem came mainly with fumbles in that game against Georgia. Ball security was a big issue, but Quinn Ewers did make a mistake. He did throw a pick, right? So this is a Texas offense that has come out flat at times. It's even come out flat in a couple of games that they've played recently. They couldn't get much going against the Aggie defense. They only scored 20 points and got only 315 yards against the Arkansas Razorbacks. The last time that I think we've seen this Texas offense put together a really, really good, tried and true, complete performance was the game against Florida, where they got 562 total yards, scored 49 points. We're throwing the football, we're running the football. They were doing everything right. You honestly maybe could even look at the Kentucky game where they got 442 yards, scored 31 points as a pretty solid day at the office there as well. This Texas offense has got to show up. The run game has got to be there. It's going to be something that Georgia will have to game plan for that they didn't have to in the first meeting between these two teams. And Quinn Ewers, if he can find his rhythm and he plays like the best version of himself, only going to help Texas here in this contest. Now for Georgia. You've heard me kind of talk a little bit about this defense and say, well, they're just not as good as they were last year. Okay, but Nate, how? Well, they're not providing as much pressure to the quarterback. 30 sacks, still a really darn good number. It's not a number that we're used to Georgia seeing. In fact, usually it's a lot higher. The run defense especially is a whole lot worse than what we're used to seeing out of a Georgia team that you could pencil in, if not pen in, every single year to allow opponents to under at least 110 rushing yards per game, if not at least under 100. The Georgia rush defense has been that good in years prior. It just isn't this year. And Georgia, we see them at times bring this defensive intensity and this defensive heart, and they play really, really well from it. When they don't bring that and they play flat-footed and they get caught standing and they miss assignments, you can have games like what happened against Alabama, like what happened against Georgia Tech, like what happened against Ole Miss, where you get beat and there's not much that you can do to come back from it. So I think Georgia's got to play with that defensive intensity, and I really do think that they will. They've been in this spot before. They know what it takes to win an SEC championship, and it takes bringing this defensive intensity that we are used to seeing out of the Georgia teams of old, the Georgia teams that went and won national championships. This is going to be an absolutely phenomenal game. I think it's going to be a lot closer on the scoreboard than the October 19th meeting was. Quick water break, and I'll tell you how this game plays out. When you sit here and you talk about this game, you see there Texas as the 2.5-point favorite. If you get the best version of Carson Beck and you get the best version of Quinn Ewers, that's going to bode well for these offenses. So, okay, you have to look at other areas, since quarterback is a question mark all around. Quinn Ewers is going through some injury stuff right now, and even his development and his play is shaky at times. Carson Beck has been really, really good down the stretch of the season, but what if that interception bug comes back to bite him? So, okay, let's take a look at this run game. As of late, the Texas run game has been a whole lot better than this Georgia run game has, and Georgia has the worst run defense, at least when you compare the run defense between these two teams. Georgia's rush defense is worse than Texas's, and Texas's rush game is better than Georgia's. You put 2 and 2 together, it creates a matchup advantage for Texas. I also believe that Texas has got some defensive players, and the last time Georgia saw this Texas defense, it got blitzed, it got pressured, it slowed down, it unraveled, and I think it happens again. I don't think Quinn Ewers is going to come out and have a dud of a game again. This run game has so much more life in it than when these two teams met previously. That is the biggest matchup advantage that I can see. It goes towards Texas, and it's why I think Texas does win this game. Incredibly close. I think it's going to be a little bit of a defensive fight. There will be some points scored. I think Carson Beck is going to play well. I think Quinn Ewers is going to play well. But where this game gets won in the trenches for me, I think Texas has a little bit better of an offensive front, and I think they have the better horses in the backfield that are playing better. Nate Frazier and Trevor Etienne, great players, but Quintravion Wisner is playing better, and the Georgia run defense is suspect. That's where I think this game gets won for Texas. Maybe a late field goal, maybe a late score, a late defensive stop. I do think some turnovers get forced here, but all in all, Texas walks away as your SEC champion. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Remember to play hard but tailgate harder, and I'll see all you guys in the next video. 2 more to go today. Goodbye.